We're gonna, hi everyone. We're gonna begin in 2 minutes, but before we begin, we wanna say hello to some of the presenters who are joining from abroad. Welcome. Thank you for your time on a Saturday. We're really excited about this event. Can you hear me well? Can you tell me that?
Yes, of course.
Yes, great.
Yes, good morning.
Yes, very well. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good Saturday, I'd say.
Yeah. Okay, so before we begin, just a reminder that you can write questions or comments in the chat box. So we can use that as a communication channel for the Q&A section that we're gonna have. So your questions will be, we're gonna record them for the Q&A, okay? We see already a person in Germany. Hi. Oh, Carlos Granados, I see you. It's difficult to see so many people on the screen. Okay, it's 10:30, so I guess we can begin. So good morning, everyone. My name is Fabiana Sachi, and I'm the president of the English Teacher Association in Rio Cuarto. On behalf of our teacher association and also on behalf of ACPI, the teacher association in Córdoba, I would like to welcome you to this webinar about diversity in ELT with the editors and some of the authors of the book International Perspectives on Diversity in ELT, which was edited by Darío Vanegas, Griselda Beacon, and Mercedes Pérez-Berlain. During this event, we will hear different accounts on diversity in ELT related to interculturality, gender, special education needs, with speakers from different countries and different educational contexts. Thank you all for your interest in this event. We have teachers from Argentina and many other contexts joining us today. Let's enjoy the event, and remember that all participants, those here on Zoom and or also on YouTube, can write your comments and questions about the different presentations because for the Q&A section that we will have. Now unfortunately, Darío Vanegas could not join us today, but he sent us an video that I am going to now share with. So it's here. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Well, this is not a presidential speech, and thank you very much for joining us today. Unfortunately, I am going on video because I've got to go see a doctor today. And I would like to thank ACPI and ALPI for bringing us together to talk about this volume, International Perspectives on Diversity in ELT. And this volume the idea of this volume emerged in 2019, so with Griselda Beacon and Mercedes Pérez-Berlain. We thought about addressing diversity because we recognized there was a gap in the literature. So we selected 3 main areas: interculturality, gender, and special education needs. And those are the sections that the book features. And we chose them because we were interested in them. But of course, we acknowledge that.
Hola, Miri, ¿cómo andás? Lo tenía en silencio, no me di cuenta. En clase, no, es sábado. Estoy estudiando y escuchando una charla pero está empezando, están haciendo la presentación, la boludez previa. Ni empezó todavía. Che, ¿cómo estás? ¿Todo bien?
Can you hear me? Can everyone please mute their mics?
This project out of ethical and professional interests, but also as a way of engaging ourselves in self-initiated collaborative professional development. So we contacted different contributors, we put together a proposal, and Palgrave accepted it, and so here it is, published this year. And this is a volume that we are proud of for many reasons, but one I would like to highlight is that it is the first volume, international volume, to be edited by 3 Argentinian educators. So this is something that I am proud of, to be honest. Anyways, I hope you enjoy this gathering of voices and look after yourselves, because I will now. Thank you very much, and bye.
Well, now Griselda, well, thank you, Dario, for your video and your nice words and the introduction to the event. Now Griselda will continue.
Thank you. It's a pity that Dario cannot join us, face to face in a way through the Zoom, but Mercedes and I, we are here to represent the team in a way, and we are, Mercedes and I, Mercedes Perez Berben, and I, we are both teacher educators, and we are all both committed to diversity and inclusion in the ELT classroom. So I would like to share with you what is our view on diversity. And we understand diversity as an intrinsic property of the English classrooms, when English is a foreign language or when English is, a second language. And it's an inherent trait in human beings. We can see a plural humanity which is expressed in our diverse identities, our diverse beliefs, contexts, perspectives, cultures, languages. And when diversity is in education, it enlightens the construction of learning environments, which is so important to consider learning environments when we think of diversity and inclusion. Think of our schools, of how they really provide the room for diversity or not. And it also informs the curricula so as to make it possible for diversity to be accessible to all, for education, for diverse education to be accessible to all. When we have a critical approach with a focus on diversity, we inevitably expose bias, discrimination, prejudice, inequity, and injustice, and we promote curiosity and respect for others. When we embody diversity in our language classroom, we help to develop a critical consciousness which defies hegemonic dominant practices, and we give learners a chance to undergo intercultural experiences and exercise democratic principles. As Dario said in the introduction, we explored 3 areas which are generally associated with diversity. There were some other areas we could not include because of the scope of the volume, right? But the ones we include are interculturality, gender, and special education needs. And we did that partly because of our professional interests, but because we also saw that they were interrelated and that they all look at all learners and teachers' well-being, as well as social justice in local and global communities. To play a little bit with words, I would like to pass on this part to Mercedes, saying that celebrating diversity is learning to embrace our common humanity in our very diversity. So Mercedes.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How do we view diversity? We view diversity within inclusive education. inclusion is acting on diversity. Because acknowledging diversity, as Griselda said, it's a very good starting point, but it's by no means enough. Why? Because within diversity, there may be oppression, there may be discrimination. So teacher intervention is crucial. Inclusive policies, practices, and procedures remove barriers which limit or exclude some learners. And the way they do this, the way inclusive education works, is not by focusing only on the excluded learners, but by focusing on the whole class. For instance, it's planning for all learners, not for most, and then think of something extra for some. It's choosing the right texts, as Griselda Beacon often says, choosing to discuss topics that matter. It's about choosing the right strategies to make sure that every learner is on board. And when this happens, we learn to decenter, we learn to challenge our views, to accept ambiguities or unpredictabilities, like Dario being with us today in a different manner. We learn to empathize, we learn to cater for the needs of others. Silent voices, the underprivileged, learners with functional diversity. We learn to construct or reconstruct our gender and sexuality identities, challenging heteronormativity. We learn to focus on people's strengths as well as their weaknesses. So, inclusion is asking ourselves what we do on a daily basis to mitigate abuse, inequity, and exclusion. And yes, it is much more work for us teachers, but the question is, can we afford not to include and perpetuate the status quo? Can we afford not to include? And knowing that inclusion is the enactment of democracy and social justice. So on this note, we will pass on to Melina Porto and Javier Arguiano, who will tell us what they did towards inclusion. Melina and Javier.
Hello, everybody. Javier will be talking today, sharing a project undertaken in La Plata, Argentina in 2019. Javier?
Okay, hello everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yes?
Perfectly
I don't usually use this, so just making sure. Okay, first Melina and I would like to thank the organizers for having us. We are pleased to be sharing our experience with all of you today. My name is Javier Arguiano, and I am the co-author of the chapter titled Beyond Intercultural Awareness in ELT. Melina Porto is the author of the chapter. Our chapter describes an interdisciplinary pedagogic project which was carried out in November 2019 in La Plata, Argentina, by the English and PE teachers of a school called Nueva Escuela, Nueva Escuela Bialik, which is run by AMIA, the Argentine Jewish Mutual Aid Society. The pedagogic project was meant to provide sixth form primary school students and first year secondary school students with an authentic context to put their intercultural communicative competence to use. not only in the classroom, but outside the classroom too, in this case, at the school's country club. Once their students were presented with a novel challenge, they would have to collaboratively invent new sports, previously unheard of sports. They would have to create new sports, previously unheard of sports on the spot. That meant that they would have to think about rules, sportswear requirement, gear requirement, scoring systems, and any other major aspect related to the sports they wanted to create. First, they would brainstorm ideas, then they would write them down, present them orally to the other teams, and then play an exhibition match. After which a quick vote happened and students decided on the vote they liked best to play it for the remaining hour of the afternoon. 38 students participated in the project, aged 11 to 14, divided into 6 teams. Almost all groups had boys and girls in them, except for one, which was an all-boys team. We planned this project using a variety of theoretical perspectives, among which we could mention the works on intercultural communicative competence, especially those by Michael Byram, the literature on CLIL, performative literacy, Zaid and Roswell 2017, and teaching for understanding, as presented in Stone-Weisky 1999. In our chapter, we aim to show how some contents of the curriculum, often dismissed as being too basic, innocuous, or even uncritical, may be a real entry point for students to actualize their intercultural communicative competence in an authentic way. In our case, students were presented with difficult questions that challenge their worldviews, questions that challenge their cultural identity, which prompted them to decenter, to go global. These questions of an intersectional nature were in relation to gender. For instance, are you thinking only on gendered teams, or can there be mixed gender teams too? Age, can people of all ages play your sport? Can they play at the same time? Disabilities, can people with disabilities play your sport? What about people with other health conditions? Or religion, can the outfit requirements you're thinking about preclude some people professing some religions from playing the sports you are thinking about? In terms of these aims and the implications thereof, we could notice the pervasiveness of prejudice, stereotyping, and even stigmatization among middle-class Argentinian teenagers when faced with the aforementioned questions. There was one significant critical incident that is described at large in the chapter, which involves a transgender male secondary school student who was almost shunned by his cis male teammates after long discussions and strong disagreements on what made a sport too violent or what made it too masculine. That is the word that they actually used. The disagreements were so strong that this caused a great rift within the group, which led them to eventually split up. And this was the only team that did not manage to successfully achieve the task that they had been presented with. We believe that this incident may serve as a cautionary tale of sorts on the challenges in encouraging students to think, act, and speak as intercultural speakers where they are not able to successfully decenter and challenge their own prejudiced views. As far as practical implications go, we would like to highlight the fact that fostering student decentering and agency may pose new challenges on teachers, not only on students. Teachers need theoretical knowledge to successfully tackle these issues in the classroom, but not only in the classroom, also outside of it, going a step beyond and helping their students go a step beyond mere intercultural awareness. That is all from me. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Javier and Melina, for your contribution. We would like to listen to somebody coming from Colombia. We would like, I would like to pass on the post to Carlo Granados Beltran. Welcome.
Thank you, Griselda, and thank you everyone for being here. I would like to start by thanking Mercedes, Griselda, and Darío for putting together this effort, and all of you for being here. As Griselda said, I'm a teacher educator located in Bogota, Colombia. The chapter that is in the book is called Promoting Understanding of Diversity by Taking a Critical Intercultural Stance. It all started by the idea of interculturality and how we see it in Colombia. Because of our context and a bilingual policy that we have, interculturality is seen more like in a positive view, right? And with an aspirational perspective, especially towards foreign cultures, like being speaking like a native speaker, wanting to travel to the United States or to Britain because they are the best places in the world and probably they speak the best English and so on and so forth. But in my case, I was thinking about how could we make this more critical? For example, why do we ignore, for example, indigenous languages or our indigenous histories? What happens with Afro-Colombian communities that are also being ignored? And what happens with, as Mercedes said at the beginning, with the underprivileged? So as a teacher educator, I was wondering how I could incorporate that into my classes. So in the chapter, I narrate how I incorporated a critical intercultural perspective into a module in the BA program where I work, a BA program in bilingualism. The module is called Language, Culture, and Identity. So initially, as I said, it had this very like aspirational perspective, but then what I tried to do is to incorporate this theoretical perspective of critical interculturality to make teachers aware, I mean, future teachers, because they are going to be language teachers when they graduate, make them aware of the inequalities and the prejudice and discrimination that there is in the country and that probably they didn't consider because of thinking of I don't know, Britain and the United States as the places to be, right? So, the incorporation of this theoretical perspective including several aspects. The first one was an adaptation of content. So I changed the syllabus that I had and I included aspects that dealt, for example, with Black history, not only with Black history from the perspective of the United States, but also from the Colombian perspective. I also included topics about sexual orientation and how discursively we started to think, for example, about diverse sexual orientations as something perverse and how that was not certain, right? I also included some aspects about women and how we thought or we started about thinking about women as inferior, right? I took this historical perspective, like taking all the theory and all that, but I also brought it to a practical aspect by showing them, because I mean, what sometimes happens is like the students usually say like, but here in Colombia, we are not racist, or we are not sexist, we are not discriminatory. Then I took examples from the newspapers and I showed them, look what happened here at this university where one teacher discriminated one Black student who studied engineering. I cited the examples in the chapter. Look at this newspaper article where we have this case of feminicide and the increase of feminicides in the country. Think about what happens with trans people in the country, right? Do you still think that we are not sexist or heterosexist or racist? And then the conversation went on how we, as language educators, could incorporate that into our classes. Because as I told you here, the perspective is somehow superficial sometimes. It's like focusing on teaching grammar, teaching skills, teaching, how would I say, teaching reading, writing, and methodology, how to teach better English, but we are not really dealing with content that is important for us as one of the most unequal countries in the world. Because for us, it takes about one report of the World Bank, it takes about 11 generations for a person who is born poor here to overcome that poverty. And sometimes we as language teachers do not consider that, but we think only about teaching English. But there are some more important things to that. And as language educators, probably would incorporate that into our everyday job, right? Now, so for the implications, what I think that the readers could take from this chapter. First, ideas on how to make content adaptations to the syllabus and how to incorporate topics that could deal with this discrimination, prejudice, and diversity as such. Another thing that could be incorporated is how to integrate history. I included a history in my syllabus because due to the context of some of the students who have like difficult backgrounds or probably previous poor high school contexts, they do not know much about history. So if you don't know history, sometimes you don't know where the prejudices, the discrimination comes from. So I incorporated that into my syllabus. The other thing that I think can be taken from the chapter are the practices, for the pedagogical practices. I mean, for example, including counter narratives or counter storytelling. I mean, there are usually common discourses that we hear, and that was what I was trying to unveil in the course. For example, okay, all people or all gay people are perverse. Where does that come from? Do we have some other stories that tell that gay people are not perverse or deviant? All Black people are lazy and they do not like to work, right? Or even worse, there is this fetish about their sexuality, and that's another story that comes here very frequently. So, do we have different stories? Can we bring stories from those Black people telling their lives as they experienced? So I incorporated the use of movies. I incorporated newspapers, as I told you, those local examples to question those prejudices and make students aware of where those ideas came from and to dismantle them so that in the future they do not replicate those ideas and transmit them to their students, because that could possibly happen, right? Another thing that is incorporated was the pedagogy of the question by Freire. So we started discussing with questions. And finally, well, I incorporated, even though my class was in English, I incorporated examples in Spanish, because the idea is not to demonize either the local language or the local cultures, but to use them as fonts of knowledge and another source of knowledge that we can incorporate into our classes for learning. So basically, that's a very brief description of the chapter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carlo. It was very, very interesting. And now we move on to Jorton Mercer from Germany.
Hello, everyone from Germany. It's in the middle of the afternoon here, so good morning to Argentina. Thank you, first of all, Dario, Mercedes, and Griselda for including me in a chapter and for inviting me to speak to this exciting group of Argentinian teachers or teacher educators. And my chapter was placed in the section on interculturality too, so I think I can continue what the two people before me started and said. And my focus was on LGBTIQ issues, sexual and gender diversity, and also from a more practical point of view, how tasks can be designed so that they become productive in English language teaching settings such as classrooms. And the whole chapter actually developed out of my teacher education context. I'm a teacher trainer at German universities, so it's probably very reflective of my German background, my German context, and what is facilitated here in Germany towards sexual and gender diversity in education. And to basically continue the critique that the two speakers before me started, I also had to look at intercultural education, intercultural communicative competence, for example. And my question was, how diverse is intercultural learning actually? So I had to look at cultural diversity and how that is represented in intercultural learning. And in my research, I identified a bit of an odd mismatch because in intercultural education, we do find a lot of positive buzzwords such as openness towards people who are culturally different, embracing the other, having peaceful and respectful intercultural encounters with people by using other languages. And I could show in my own research that there is indeed a tendency to think in very diverse terms. For example, in Germany, we do have a move towards the diversity of English-speaking countries, which are represented in classrooms. We do have post-colonial considerations in our classrooms. We include migration and ethnic diversity in our classrooms. However, and this is important, this does not stretch out to sexual and gender diversity, which means that lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender issues are very often completely neglected or overlooked or marginalized or simply not made a topic in classrooms. And I found this to be a very strange mismatch. On the one hand, there's a lot of cultural diversity in intercultural education, but on the other hand, there are notions of cultural diversity that are blocked completely from view. So I made a strong case in favor of including sexual and gender diversity topics, LGBTIQ identities and themes into our classroom. And in my chapter, I used the word lip service. So it's basically practice what you preach. When we say intercultural learning is diverse, I think we as teachers and educators really need to be reflective and critical what we actually mean by that, what our own practices show when it comes to diversity. And very often, one can certainly legitimize to include LGBTIQ issues in classrooms, but the feedback I get from the student teachers and teachers I educate is, okay, I get the idea, we have to do it, and it's part of the German curricula, okay, that's all fine, but how can I actually achieve LGBTIQ inclusion in the classroom? What input materials can I use? How should I plan my lessons accordingly? What tasks can I design so that LGBTIQ issues become a focal point? And this is when I started to develop the task typology that's part of the chapter in Dario's, Griselda's, and Mercedes' edited volume. And it basically emerges from my student teachers telling me that they need some practical guidance. So when you read the chapter or go through this chapter, you find a diverse set of tasks that I designed for the specific purpose of bringing more diversity and especially LGBTIQ diversity into class. So it's basically, you find ways of integrating input materials, for example, LGBTIQ literature or autobiographies into class. There are tasks that allow learners to bring in their prior knowledge, their existing knowledge. For example, of watching or participating in LGBTIQ pride parades, knowledge of the Stonewall riots. I think I was muted, sorry. And there are also tasks that help learners to, or stress the importance to contextualize LGBTIQ issues in culture and in history. What I think is very important, and that's why we also have a task for that, is to teach learners LGBTIQ related words, lexes, and expressions so that they become empowered to speak about these issues, to reflect on these issues. I think it was Mercedes who mentioned the term heteronormativity earlier. There are also a few tasks that guide learners towards identifying sexual norms and expectations. So it's not just about LGBT inclusion, but also to consider heterosexual norms and how they shape and guide our lives. For example, there's one reference to an LGBT autobiographical text where a transgender student in the US says that she can't sing in a choir because it's a bigendered choir and she doesn't fit in. So this is a way of reflecting on norms and expectations around gender and sexuality. And what I think is very important is also to encourage learners to produce their own language, their own output, their own product. And that's why the tasks I suggest there also include this product and output orientation. For example, with my students at university, I read an LGBT short story, and the learners in my class then transformed this LGBT short story into a digital visual story. It's basically a comic strip that was animated, and that's their way of engaging with LGBTIQ themes. So it can become very productive indeed, rather than just being the difficult topic that no one dares to touch. And I believe that this chapter is helpful for teachers because they can reflect on their own stance towards diversity. It's not meant to be an accusation in the sense that all teachers never include diversity, but it's a starting point for teachers to reflect on what they are doing. And from a practical point of view, I think it's helpful because it offers guidance for lesson planning, task design, and material and text choice in classrooms. Okay.
Thank you, Torsten.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we are going to listen to two Argentinian colleagues, Paola Cosu and Gabriela Brun, and they are going to share their views on gender.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Griselda. Thank you, Griselda, Mercedes, and Darío, and the organizers for inviting us. And thank you, everybody here, for joining us today. Well, our chapter is entitled Supporting In-Service Teachers for Embracing Comprehensive Sexuality Education in the ELT Classroom. And well, Gabriela and I wrote it together with Darío Vanegas. Ours is a purely descriptive chapter which recounts a workshop that we delivered in Southern Argentina back in 2019 in the context of a regional conference for teachers and student teachers of English organized by the local teacher training college. And well, Darío was in charge of the organization, invited us to deliver a workshop on comprehensive sexuality education, which aimed at raising awareness about teaching CSE, right, or comprehensive sexuality education, and also revising the teachers' practices. Well, as most of us know here, CSE is a rights-based and a gender-focused approach to sexuality here in Argentina. And well, here in Argentina, which makes the inclusion of comprehensive sexuality education compulsory at schools at all levels, right? And well, CSE covers a wide variety of topics. And well, in the workshop that we delivered and that we describe in the chapter, we dealt with some of these topics, right? For example, diversity as seen in the different family configurations and gender perspective in mainstream coursebooks and also in fairy tales. Well, the workshop had 3 different parts: a theoretical framework. We gave examples of tasks framed within CLIL, content and language integrated learning, which showed actually examples, right, of true integration of comprehensive sexuality education and language skills. And then there was a hands-on section in which teachers and student teachers together collaboratively created CSC lesson plans framed within CLIL. Well, the experience that we describe in the chapter allowed us, all of us, right, the participants and the presenters, to analyze how gender issues are presented in the materials that are used at schools. Sometimes we have the opportunity to choose the materials, some of the times we can't. And also we discussed possible ways, right, of adapting this material so that they better reflect the reality of our classrooms. And we help our students to become critically aware of these deeply rooted assumptions that all of us have about gender. And also the workshop was fertile ground for reflection upon the need to go beyond the obligation imposed by the law, because these might lead to a superficial incorporation of comprehensive sexuality education. We need to understand that the inclusion of CSC concerns us all, right? And this in turn pushes us to reflect upon one crucial element, that is teacher identity, whether we see ourselves as educators in the first place or as just technicians, right? We do believe that it's important and really necessary to start discussing teacher identity in the early stages of the career, because it inevitably impacts every pedagogic decision we take in our classes. And now Gabriela will go on.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Pao. Okay, to continue with what Pao was saying, of course, discussion of teacher identity in initial teacher education is crucial, right? But also, given the sensitive nature of some of the topics that comprehensive sexuality education covers, and the fact that we are all sexual beings and that sexuality has for many years been considered taboo, we believe that more instances of continuing professional development, like the one we describe in the chapter, are needed, right? In the 2.5 years that have passed since we delivered this workshop, which was in May 2019, we are happy to say that we have come a long way. Yes, and there is much more awareness about comprehensive sexuality education now, and about the need, the urgency to bring it, to incorporate it into our classes. And of course, there is also a greater demand on the part of our students as well. Yes, there is a much broader legal landscape in Argentina too that has come to enrich the CSC law since it was passed in 2006. Still, yes, some CSC topics, some comprehensive sexuality topics are considered controversial by many teachers, which means that many of those topics are not brought into the classroom, or are brought, as Paul said before, in a superficial way, in spite of all the laws and in spite of our obligation as educators. Okay, this is why we insist on the incorporation of CSC, of course, in initial teacher education, and also more CPD instances that offer not only opportunities for reflection, but also hands-on experience to equip educators with the knowledge and the strategies which they need to address all topics related to diversity in ELT. For some of the teachers and teacher students who attended this workshop that we described in the chapter, it was the first time they were required to plan a lesson including CSC topics. And in this sense, the workshop opened a window into CSC, into comprehensive sexuality education. And it also gave the participants the opportunity to think of proposals in collaboration with others. Okay, well, and to conclude, we still insist, we believe that it's really important that instances of CPD and also initial teacher education provide teachers and teachers-to-be with tools, strategies to critically analyze the material they work with, and also the syllabus, right? And also to spot the instances in which a prescribed content, a prescribed topic can be addressed from a CSC or a gender perspective, okay? Which will hopefully become part of their daily practices and the first steps toward truly transformative teaching practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Paola and Gabriela. And now we move on to Eva Domagala-Sisk and Anna Podleska, I hope I pronounced it correctly, from Poland.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to starting the presentation of our chapter. So our chapter aims at presenting principles, strategies, and communication techniques which have been effective in English classes for deaf and hard of hearing students within an inclusive education perspective. And these techniques have been developed during an action research project, which makes them part of evidence-based practice in educating deaf and hard of hearing foreign language learners. Now, for the general introduction to the chapter, I just wanted to mention that back in the day when we first started teaching foreign languages to university students who are deaf and hard of hearing in the late 1990s, we were in a very difficult position for a number of reasons. And the first reason was that prior to that date, deaf and hard of hearing learners were exempted from taking compulsory foreign language classes. And then the Ministry of Education issued a decree stating that they had every right and that in fact they had to learn foreign languages. So we, in other words, we went from the situation where their hearing loss was seen as an insurmountable barrier to learning and acquiring a foreign language to a situation in which they had to learn foreign languages because everybody does. So as you can imagine, it was very difficult to find teaching aids, even such simple ones like, for instance, subtitled videos. If you wanted to show your students a subtitled video, you had to create subtitles yourself using available software, which was extremely time consuming. It was super difficult to get in touch with colleagues in the field of what we now call surdo-glottodidactics, which is teaching foreign languages to and learning foreign languages by students who are deaf and hard of hearing. Fortunately, teachers being teachers usually see solutions where others see problems. So those challenges made European teachers of English to the deaf and hard of hearing. Those challenges made us start networking and supporting each other through the international research group English for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. And here I would like to encourage everyone who's interested in this subject to check out our website and the project that projects that we are involved in, and who knows, perhaps join us. And now I'm going to let Eva tell you a little bit about the different teaching and learning strategies for deaf and hard of hearing classes. And those strategies can be used, but perhaps more importantly, they can become inspiration for a creative search of one's own teaching solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for introducing. As you may see, the title of our chapter is A Challenge, a Must, an Adventure. And that's what Anya said, right? That first of all, it was like a challenge. Then it was, you have to, you must do something. And now it's simply a great adventure. We've got some links in the chat section, so you can even check the website and our projects on the ResearchGate in a minute. As Anya said, join us. As for our methodology, I'd like to share just 4 things with you today because I've got 2 minutes. So we try to follow the universal learning design model. And thank you, Professor Mercedes, for introducing inclusive education so well at the beginning of our meeting, because we are like trying to work in this kind of framework. So inclusive education as education which is good, which is appropriate for every student who is in class. And to be effective, to be appropriate, we need, first of all, we need different ways of teaching, different ways of preparing the input. So we try to use technology as wherever it's possible, like subtitles, like induction loops and some other technical aids which may support us. But we also try to do our strategies as much polysensory, multisensory as possible. So we try to use a lot of visuals, a lot of films, a lot of materials which can be seen by the students if their hearing does not work properly. But at the same time, we want to introduce them into writing as much as possible. We want them to listen to, if only they can, because it's a stereotype that deaf students do not hear anything. They do hear a lot. So we have to teach in such a way as to be heard, actually. I am in the room where usually our classes are. So, for example, you can see that the physical environment is also prepared in a certain way. So we've got this cork walls and some other elements in this classroom which make it easier for the students to listen to. So that's the first thing, to give the classes, to teach in a polysensory, multisensory way so as to be understood. The second way is to let the students produce their knowledge in many different ways. So not only in speaking, because they might have some problems with that, but also in writing, in preparing PowerPoint presentations, in doing chat with us, for example. If we do not, if we are not able to have a long conversation, we can chat. And we do a lot of things like that. So we use writing instead of speaking and different other sorts of ways. So the second thing would be to let the students produce the language as well as they can and in the way they can do despite their disability. And the third thing is motivation. So increase the students' motivation, increase the students' somehow belief in themselves that they can learn, they are able to, they can use English as a tool for everything they want. And just to sum up, our students are our success. So our students work in the USA or in the Great Britain where they use English just for on everyday basis in the work environment. Our studies study abroad. One student of us, of me and Anna, is now in Sweden. She sent her greetings today because she's an Erasmus student in Sweden, being trilingually, deeply deaf student. So it's a long story how to increase this motivation, but you can read a lot about our experiences in the blogs. And you also have our email. So if anybody is interested in getting into contact, please do it. We will be happy to have you on board of this topic. And thanks once again, Griselda, Mercedes and Dario, for inviting us both to preparing the chapter in the book and also for the meeting today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Anna. What a pleasure to have you here. Now we have our last group. They are three. They are a team also. They are based in Japan. They are Robert Lower, Matthew Sheffer, and there's a third Matthew, and Matthew Turner, sorry. And they couldn't be here today because of the span of time between Japan and Argentina. So they sent a video. So they are going to close this presentation of all the different contributors, and then we will have this little moment for questions and comments.
Hello, I'm Robert Lowe.
I'm Matthew Schaefer.
And I'm Matthew Turner.
And in this video, we will give a quick summary of our chapter Uncovering Diverse Perspectives and Responses to Working with English Learners with Special Educational Needs.
So students with special educational needs are part of the diverse fabric of ELT classes, and this is increasingly being recognised by the field. However, while SEN support in mainstream education and training is well established, little attention has been paid to the professional development of language teachers who come into working with SEN students. In our context of Japan, recent government acts suggest that universities provide reasonable accommodation for SEN students. However, although this has encouraged a growing awareness of these issues, little is known about the nature of language teachers' beliefs and practices in light of these changes. Given that the majority of academic and professional training courses such as MAs and TESOL certificates largely don't feature these issues, unlike other mainstream teaching programs. So in our case study, we interviewed 5 teachers from an English communication program at a private university in Tokyo, who all received their qualifications in the UK or the US and shared a lack of official SEN training. These were seen to be reflective of many ELT professionals around the world. With a focus on teacher cognition, our study explored the following questions. To what extent did these teachers feel prepared to support SEN learners? And what were their initial perspectives on teaching? And what approaches did they take in creating an inclusive environment for their learners? And how did their perspectives change over time? So, what were their stories?
So collectively, the participants in our study taught students with both physical and developmental special needs. We asked the teachers to reflect on their experiences, and these reflections revealed the following answers to our research questions. So first, before teaching their courses, the teachers generally felt anxiety and apprehension about supporting their SEN learners. This was either because they were concerned about their students' ability to meet the aims of the course at the same level as their classmates, or because they, the teachers themselves, felt unprepared to provide the appropriate amount of accommodations. The teachers reported holding inclusive views about supporting SEN students, although some also revealed initial feelings of being burdened by what they perceived to be extra work. Or that some university courses, specifically ones requiring large amounts of student-to-student interaction, may not be suitable for all learners, meaning SEN learners. After teaching their SEN students, however, the teachers reflected that their initial anxieties were baseless, as their classes quickly gained regularity, and their SEN students had few issues achieving the same learning outcomes as their classmates. Finally, there was a growing realization that learner disabilities should simply be viewed as individual differences of the type that all students have, regardless of whether or not they are classified as special needs or not. To quote one of the participants, "A disability is just part of a profile. And understanding that total profile, whether a student has a disability or not, is helpful, if not necessary, in optimizing that student's learning experience. So, with these findings in mind, we'd like to end with some reflective questions and some final comments.
We ended our chapter with some reflection questions, and we think it would be appropriate to ask the audience today to consider those same questions. These questions are, firstly, the teachers in our study felt unprepared for teaching SEN learners. How prepared do you feel to teach students with special educational needs? Secondly, most ELT training programs do not include SEN instruction as a major topic. How can ELT training better prepare teachers for teaching SEN learners? Finally, the major insight from the teachers in this study was that rather than thinking of SEN learners as a special group, teachers should focus more generally on differentiated learning. Should SEN be considered as something separate from other individual differences? The needs of SEN learners is a topic that many teachers, such as those interviewed for this study, feel unprepared for. Our study suggests that teachers need not feel this way, and that training programs could contribute to preparing teachers to develop a sense of confidence in approaching this, rather than apprehension. In particular, we feel it is important for teachers to think of their students' special educational needs as just another form of individual differences, and that accommodations for SEN learners are likely to increase the general accessibility of the class.
Okay, so thanks for watching our summary today, and we hope that you'll now go ahead and read the chapter if you haven't done so already. And yeah, we look forward to engaging with you all more on this topic. So thanks for watching today, and see you all soon.
So thank you, Robert, Matthew, and Matthew. And we've come to the end of this absolutely marvelous session. It's 11:30, and I haven't been reading the chat because I have been really concentrating on what each of you were saying. So unless there is a burning question over there that you have spotted, we can round off by reading to you the very last paragraph in our book.
Shall I start?
What do you say? Hang on a minute. Maybe Fabiana and Cecilia have been reading the chat, and maybe there's something there that needs to be addressed.
No, there are great comments, a couple of questions. It's good to see that the authors were there, the ones who we just saw them on video. So you can go ahead and close with what you had planned.
Brilliant. I think time is ticking. So if there is a question you really want to ask any of us in particular, we would be more than happy to chat on WhatsApp or Gmail or on email or whatever. So here comes the very last. Yes, Gri, I have interrupted you.
No, that's okay. I was going to say basically that all the contributors from all the different areas, they have all really made a point on having a thick content, that teaching English is a means to work with so many issues that affect us in who we are, in our deepest identity construction. And that could be from any of the fields. And there are lots of interactions and lots of bridges that we can establish from one chapter to another. And these are examples of how they work, their research, their practice, and this informs us teachers, right? And that was the spirit of the group. And with that, I think that we can go to our last paragraph.
Over to you.
This volume shows that we may need micro actions that are systematically and collectively constructed, maintained, and extended from within ELT to have a wider and sustainable impact in all areas of social practice.
If you have reached this far into the volume or into this session, here is our invitation. Let's celebrate diversity by making it possible in contexts where diversity is hidden, silenced, and or criminalized. These contexts are not faraway territories. The need for embracing diversity can be literally found round the corner from our homes. So let's celebrate diversity and go for inclusion.
Thank you, Mercedes, Griselda, all the presenters for a very nice panel that leaves us with a lot of things to think about, consider. People are asking where they can get the book or the material, if there's free access to material, or where they can get the book.
They can contact us, and yes.
Okay. Well, with that said, we want to thank, just like everyone is doing on the chat box, we want to thank you all for being here, for spending an hour talking about such important issues. And maybe, as Griselda was saying, this event is one of those micro actions needed, right? To keep thinking about such important issues that should involve us all in language education. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for being here. Let's keep thinking about this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carlo Hack. Thank you,
Thank
Torsten. Thank you, Eva. Thank you,
Thank you
Gabriela. Thank you, Paola. Thank you, Melina. Thank you, Javier. Thank you, Ana. Thank you, Fabiana.
Bye.
Thank you, Dario.
Oh, yes.
With us. He is with us in a different way. In a different way. This is another way of inclusion, isn't it? Yeah, it's including people as they are and as they can.
Thank you, Torsten.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the Saturday.
Thank you.
Yes. Needless to say, we loved to participate.